All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Adam Zemkowski. I'm a community organizer with Seattle City Councilmember Kshama Sawant. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. We're here, of course, as part of the People's Budget Movement. This is a community meeting to prep ourselves and our movement for the Budget Committee, which is coming up in just under an hour, where we want to make the people's budget and the Justice for George Floyd protest demand to defund the Seattle Police Department by at least 50% or $85 million. We want to bring that demand to life. And of course, we want to bring other people's budget demands to life, like stop the sweeps and funding for renter rights, organizing, and fighting evictions. In order to do that, of course, a lot of folks, I'm sure, have been a part of these community meetings. We are going to have Councilmember Kshama Sawant open up the meeting with some political context. Let us know what's going on. You know, oftentimes establishment politicians like to keep or usually keep these discussions behind closed doors. These community prep meetings will help bring the movement inside in order to help prepare for giving public comment in just under an hour, and also, of course, to continue organizing our movement. We're also going to hear from community organizers in the People's Budget Movement and in the community. Reverend Angela Ying, senior pastor at Bethany United Church of Christ, and Sean Smith, who is a resident at Nicholsville Tiny House Village. And of course, before we go into those things, hopefully most of you watching have already signed up for public comment, which opens up at 8 a.m., 2 hours before each budget committee meeting. But if you haven't, Nick Jones, another community organizer in our office, and Councilmember Kshama Sawant's office, is going to demonstrate or show people how to sign up. It is worth getting signed up right now if you haven't already. It does have an impact in pressuring council. So Nick Jones, go ahead and show people how to sign up real quickly before we go to Councilmember Sawant. Take it, Nick.
Thanks, Adam. All right, hopefully folks can see my screen. Yeah, like Adam said, public sign up, absolutely still something folks should be doing. And to get there, you just have to get to this web page. It's pretty straightforward to get there, but generally the fastest way I've found is to just type in public comment Seattle or Seattle public comment in the search bar of whatever browser you are using. It should be the first URL here, this .gov address. You just click on that. It should take you right there. You can scroll down. There's some information about how to sign up. What you want to do is go down to this form and just fill this out in its entirety. And especially important is you want to make sure you're using your email and phone number that you would normally use here. Whatever email you put in, they'll send a link to the Zoom call that City Council is using to host their meeting, so you can weigh in. And the phone number you give will be how they identify you in public comment. So definitely fill it all the way out, fill all this stuff out, click this box. And then, because I think especially with so many people signing up for public comment, you can, with what you're addressing, the council members will see that. So I would say something like defund by at least 50%, something that lets them know kind of indicatively, just even a little bit what you want to talk about. And that can continue to put maximum pressure on the council as we go through today's meeting. So definitely sign up, and then you just hit this submit button, should send you an email, and that should be it. So folks, while I kick it back to Adam, definitely take the time to go and sign up right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Nick, for that instruction. Yeah, so obviously we're going to hear very briefly or very shortly, we'll hear from Councilmember Kshama Sawant, then from our community speakers. It is important, of course, to understand that there's, this budget process is labyrinthian. There's a lot of efforts being made by the city establishment to obscure what exactly defund is, what's possible in this current budget session. So after community speakers, we're going to go through a quite thorough slideshow to, again, just kind of reinforce our movement with the basic information about what is possible, what defund looks like, and how we can actually fight to win it. And we're going to do that together with our community speakers so we can kind of get some voices from the, we are the movement's council office. it's always, of course, good to hear from different voices in the movement as we're going through these slides. But before all this, let's hear first from Councilmember Kshama Sawant to give us some political context, to provide us an update before we go into this budget committee meeting in just under an hour. So Councilmember Sawant, take it from here, please.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone. As Adam said, and as we have always demonstrated through the 6.5 years that we have been in office, that this office belongs to working people, ordinary people, the marginalized, those who are fighting for a better world. And it is, by definition, the movement's council office. And so it's no surprise that as soon as the nationwide rebellion sparked by George Floyd's brutal murder at the hands of the police in Minneapolis, but indeed by the overall unbearable conditions of racial injustice, economic exploitation, housing unaffordability, and escalating homelessness, not to mention the way the pandemic has unfolded, which has everything to do with capitalism, and especially the situation under American capitalism with lack of access to basic needs like healthcare. This rebellion has unfolded, and even though it's at an ebb at this moment, it has left a deep, deep imprint on the consciousness of hundreds of millions of people, not only in the United States but around the world. And it was out of this uprising that the defund 50% by at least 50% defunding the police came out. And as I said, because we are the movement's council office, it's no surprise that we immediately stood with the movement in demanding defund 50% and also in pledging that our office will do everything in our power to fight for it. But of course, as we know from our previous experiences, the power of our office is only proportionate to the power that we have on the street, the power of our community organizing. And so that's why these community meetings have been so important, because I think they're really providing an avenue, as Adam said, for us to collectively organize. And in addition to defunding the police by at least 50%, of course, we are also fighting, and we are continuing to fight, as we have done in the past years, to stop once and for all the sweeps of our homeless neighbors, to disband the euphemistically named navigation team, and actually provide tiny house villages, services that work for our homeless neighbors, and ultimately, of course, social housing, which is affordable permanently to everybody, because housing is a human right. So at the outset, I wanted to congratulate everybody who has been with us in this fight for years. And even before we won this office, many of our fellow activists have been active in the movement. And so I wanted to first send a congratulations message to everybody. Share this with everybody who's not on this Zoom call also. Specifically, all our homeless activists, our activists at Share Wheel, Nicholsville, the support that we have got from those who are working with Lehigh, and especially the Black Lives Matter movement activists who have brought to the forefront the severe injustices in our society, including on the question of police violence and the lack of police accountability. I also wanted to congratulate all the rank and file union members in the MLK Labor County, MLK County Labor Council, who have done a tremendous service to our society by taking a historic vote with a big majority, voting to expel the Seattle Police Officers Guild from our Labor Council by saying that an injustice to one is an injustice to all, and we cannot really fight for workers' rights without also standing firmly against oppression of all kinds. And also, congratulations to the tremendous work done by our faith leaders, especially led by Reverend Angela Ying and Reverend Robert Jeffrey. And I hope that when Reverend Ying speaks, she will read from the powerful letter that many of our faith leaders from all faiths, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian, have written a powerful letter together demanding that the city council really represent their constituents and that they stand on their own promises. They made the so-called veto-proof majority promise, and we saw what has happened, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I really hope Reverend Ying shares some words from that letter, because I think that will be really encouraging and heartwarming to everybody who's watching. And I just wanted to take stock of where we are. We saw a historic uprising in our society sparked by George Floyd, and we have won some key victories right here in Seattle. We won the chemical weapons ban, even the promise. And by the way, that chemical weapons ban, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but we should important what a crucial victory that was. It is the only ban of its kind anywhere in the world that we know of, which is actually banning the use and purchase of a city's police department and a whole range of weapons, not just tear gas, but blast balls, rubber bullets, sonic and ultrasonic weapons, the whole range of harmful weapons that the police have been using against peaceful protest movement. And we also won the promise from council members that they would defund the police by at least 50%. That promise, whether it is kept or not, is a different question, but forcing the Democratic Party establishment to actually say that in public, that is a huge accomplishment of our movement. It shows the pressure that we can successfully apply. And I think that pressure is a result of having this massive movement on the street. Primarily, it's thanks to this rebellion and thanks to the courageous young people, the multiracial movement that has come out in support of Black and brown neighbors and said that we will not tolerate police violence. But in Seattle, it is also because of the combination between the street movement and having the movement's voice in City Hall, by the fact that our office came out immediately and said we are fighting for defund by 50%, that immediately put a sharp pressure on the Democratic establishment to come out also in favor of that. And whether they keep their promise or not is also a question that we have to seriously examine. But first of all, just getting that promise from them publicly is a sign of how we can succeed. We also have won a very important victory, which is defeating Mayor Durkin's latest of many attempts, shameful attempts, to evict North Lake Nicholasville Tiny House Village. And we have made sure that the City Council unanimously supported the amendment from our office and from the People's Budget Movement to make sure that the village is not evicted for the rest of this year. But you know what? It means that we have to continue fighting as well, because what happens after this year is ended. But that's where that's where if we want our movement to grow, if we want to actually win serious victories, then we have to also be serious and sober about what we have not been able to win, and the obstacles that the mayor, the police officers guild, and Chief Best and the federal courts, the obstacles that they all together have put forward against the chemical weapons ban. That is a very unfortunately a powerful example of how movements have no moment where we can relent, because we have the whole establishment and the whole system and the capitalist state stacked up against us. We have to really use this opportunity, all of the lessons that we're learning, to take stock of how far we've come and what we will need in order to go further. Because if we don't do that in a very serious way, if we don't learn lessons from what we don't win, then we are not going to have more victories, because we have to learn from our defeats as well as from our victories. So what has happened? One, as I said, the major obstacles to the ban, we have to continue fighting against that. We have to come back re-energized in the autumn to do that. But we've also seen how quickly, in a matter of days, literally days, this Democratic Party establishment in the City Council went from making grand promises for 50% defund to saying, well, we can't do it for this reason, we can't do it for that reason, we can't do it for so many reasons. Apparently, it will take time. We cannot go against the Police Officers Guild. We have to first negotiate with them and then make these changes. I wanted to say, without going into details, because we have a presentation that will do that, I wanted to just say, none of these objections or excuses that the City Council has brought forward has any basis in reality. If they want to defund the police by 50%, they could do it today. So the amendments that we have brought forward from our People's Budget Movement are very much based in fact and not fiction. And so one of the things we have to do today and on Monday is not believe the lies that are coming from the establishment that, that we don't know what we're doing. We absolutely know what we are doing. It's a question of political will. To give you a concrete example, King County Metro just recently gave a 25-day notice, just 25 days notice to the bus drivers that were laid off because of the recession. So, it's an example of the burden of the recession actually being put on the shoulders of ordinary people. Let's keep in mind, first of all, defunding the police is not about recession or budget cuts or putting the burden of the budget recession on public sector workers. As a public sector worker myself, as a member of the teachers union, I'm absolutely opposed to any such thing. And in fact, the Democratic establishment has a long track record of doing just that, which is carrying out austerity when there is a recession. But let's keep in mind, first of all, defunding the police is not about recession. It is about defunding the police because the police are causing harm to our community members of color, to our poor people and working class people, and to our homeless neighbors. That is why we are talking about this. So first of all, let's make that distinction. But secondly, King County Metro is subject to the same statewide rules on labor as the city council is. And so if Metro can lay off its bus drivers, giving them only a 25-day notice, then why can the city council do the same thing exactly? This is a question you have to ask them. If you're subject to the same rules at the state level, then why are you obfuscating the facts and telling people inaccurately that we can't do this because we will need 2 to 3 months to negotiate with Spock? There is no such thing. And I have personally spoken to the city attorney's office and have not gotten this kind of result. I don't know what they are talking about, but I can tell you it is not based on facts. When they wanted to repeal the Amazon tax, they did it within 48 hours, meaning telling the public, putting the bill on the calendar of the city council, and then voting on it. All of that happened in less than 28 hours. When they gave Boeing executives the massive, the single largest ever corporate handout of $8.7 billion, which was a few days after I was first elected in 2013 in November, they did that, the state establishment did that in 7 days. So in other words, when they want to take away the benefits and the rights that we have won as workers, they do it in a twinkling of an eye, with lightning speed. When it comes to defunding the police or doing things that will actually benefit our society, they immediately balk at that. And the reason they hesitate is because at the end of the day, for politicians, it is a question of deciding, are you on the side of ordinary people who are getting screwed over by the system? Or are you on the side of the status quo where you don't want to upset anybody in power? That's what it comes down to. There is nothing more complicated than that. I can tell you that with my personal experience. It is nothing more complicated than that. At the end of the day, it comes down to which side you are on, and are you courageous enough to stand with the right side of history, and which often is the left side of history, which is funny. But so that's what it comes down to. And if we want to extract the correct votes from the city council, it is not about telling them the facts. They know all the facts. It's about building a powerful movement on the ground. And that is what we did with the Amazon tax. We had a democratically organized movement on the ground where even the coordinating committee of the movement was elected directly by our action conferences. And I was on the coordinating committee, we were held accountable by the movement directly because all the major decisions went through the action conference. And it was the fact that we had a democratic movement is what allowed us to collect 30,000 signatures. And those 30,000 signatures for the ballot initiative put the real fear into big business and the establishment, and they ultimately agreed to do it. And of course, now they're claiming they did it, but of course, we know we did it. So at the end of the day, it is about building that kind of strong movement. And it's also, in the case of defunding, understanding that the police play a role to repress ordinary people in order to continue inflicting their kind of state, which exploits most of us. And so in that sense, complete defunding and a complete end to racist policing is not possible on the basis of capitalism. So we have to also connect our movements for demands like defunding, like an elected community oversight board on the police, all of this to the capital system itself, because as Malcolm X says, you can't have capitalism without racism. So let's fight as much as possible in the next week. Let's let's make sure we speak out today. Let's make sure we speak out on Monday, and then let's come back re-energized in the fall to fight for some more. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Shama, for that really helpful and insightful political contextualization. Obviously, it's no surprise when the city establishment, and of course, that includes the the council members who year after year have voted for these bloated police budgets, year after year have fought against the tax Amazon movement, against the movement for rent control. So it's no surprise when the promises made at the height of the movement are then, of course, gone back on in every way possible. When the movement is put to the test. So let's go ahead now and hear from community leader Reverend Angela Ying, who's got a lot of experience actually being put to the test by city establishments and continuing forward, and obviously played a fundamental role in helping our movement win the Amazon tax, and has also played a critical role in transferring that movement to this people's budget movement to genuinely defund the police by 50% and invest in Black and Brown communities in doing so. So let's hear from senior pastor at Bethany United Church of Christ, Reverend Angela Ying.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, all of you, and thanks to Councilmember Shama Sawant. I'm always amazed at her and her staff for continuing to work so consistently, nonstop, and tirelessly for all of us people, and that's why I get inspired to do the same. So just want to say thank you to all of you, because the fight continues, and we know that we're doing it for the most vulnerable, for the working class people, and for our communities, and so hats off to you as we continue. We'll continue to win when we fight, and we know that even if there are times when the council goes and betrays us, we'll continue to fight and keep them accountable. I just wanted to share with you, as Councilmember Shama Sawant shared, I wanted to let you know that we as faith leaders sent a letter to the council. So let me begin with that. And then I'll share some other important points that we're going to share later on as a community. We will. Dear City Council members, we as faith leaders ask that you not fail our communities, your very constituencies. As the people's movement, the people's budget, King County Equity Now, Decriminalize Seattle, Got Green, Wall Block, No New Youth Jail, Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action, One America, ACLU Washington, Washington Poor People's Campaign, along with hundreds of organizations and tens of thousands of working people, and the people's budget, we have urged you in emails, letters, and public comments for weeks. So defund the police budget by 50% and invest the $85 million, which leaves $85 million still left for the SPD in our within our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities now. We're disappointed to learn on Friday, and then we also learned on Monday of the council's budget committee that after weeks of promising our communities to defund the Seattle Police Department in 2020 by 50%, the council majority have now put forward budget proposals that only slice a tiny fraction of that amount from the SPD budget. Your budget proposals fail to defund SPD by anywhere close to 50% in 2020, as council member has shared. Furthermore, by saying that the council is going to take money instead of defund from the rainy day fund, which the mayor will veto, our communities will in fact end up with nothing. This is not acceptable. We urge you to honor your commitments and your own pledges to the people. Simply do what you said publicly you would do in July with a veto-proof majority and defund the police budget by 50%. Councilmember Sawant has proposed to the council budget amendments that will actually cut $85 million or 50% of the remaining 2020 Seattle Seattle Police Department budget, and put that money into urgent social needs, especially in Black and Brown communities. No delays, nothing less than what you promised our communities, your very constituencies. I sent in two links. We sent in two links where they showed 7 of the 9 Seattle council members pledged this. in July and also in the Seattle Times in Capitol Hill. And we wrote, "We will hold you accountable as you have asked us to do so," which was quoted by Councilmember Strauss. "For it is not enough to simply say Black Lives Matter. We need your actions to defund and invest in our communities and Black lives." We have pastors, clergy, Muslim leaders, rabbis from all different faith communities supporting and standing with our communities to defund the police budget by 50% this year to invest in our communities without delay. Just wanted to share that with you because that's really important, because I want you to know, as people, you are not alone. There are tens of thousands of working people that are fighting for this. And we know that it's a constant fight together. But as a faith leader, and actually, I'm going to share in my public comment if I have, because I signed in at 8 a.m., hope you did too, that basically for me, integrity is doing what you say you're going to do, right? That's what leadership is. And so that's really important that we continue to make sure that our council members are working for our people, just as Councilmember Sawant's office is. All 9 of them should be doing the same thing. And so we'll hold them accountable. I just want to, again, thank everybody for working on this. We need to defund the SPD. We need to eliminate the NAV team. We need to stop the sweeps, because sweeps are for garbage. Sweeps are not for loving, breathing human beings. We need to continue to build tiny house villages. We need to make sure that we transfer the 911 center to civilian control out of the SPD hands, and that we could fund the Green New Deal, which they've been talking about for years, and have an oversight board. As you know, I've also worked with Chateau to make sure that those residents are not evicted, and that was huge. But that one thing that we need to also fund, if you want to share in your comments, is to fund renters' rights in the fight against evictions. Because the last thing we need is more people on the streets. No, we want to house them. So hoping that you'll join us in that fight as well. I'm just so grateful for all of you. Thanks for letting me share.
All right, thank you so much, Reverend Jing. Thank you so much for those words. Reverend has a lot of experience, building movements and pressuring city council. And I know there are a lot of people watching today also have gotten experience over the weeks, months, and years. And others are going to be doing this for their first time. It's of course important to remember that, we've just likely will have 60 seconds, maybe as much as 2 minutes, but in that short period of time, of course, we want to get our, the personal stories, the reason, who we are, communicate, who we are, but also if we're from an organization, if we're from a movement, demonstrating the unity of these demands, the fact that it's not just the people's budget movement demanding to defund the Seattle Police Department, but as Reverend Ying explained, there's a lot of places where this money can go, of course, starting with massive investments in Black and Brown community. And we'll go over this shortly when we go over, step by step what an actual defund legislation looks like. But, tens of millions of dollars for affordable housing, millions of dollars for community organizations. And then, of course, also the millions of dollars that go to homeless, tiny house villages, which of course will disproportionately impact in a positive way the Black and Brown community that's been so disproportionately impacted by the failure of capitalism to provide affordable housing for working people and especially marginalized communities. And then of course, homelessness prevention programs like funding for renters organizing, ways to empower the more than 50% of the population, which, we know mainstream media is reporting with the coronavirus crisis, the economic, crisis, the layoffs, the loss of wages, a tsunami of evictions is coming. And so our People's Budget Movement is fighting for organizing for renters and for fighting evictions. Let's go ahead and talk right now to another community leader in the People's Budget Movement, someone who's year in, year out for marginalized people, for homeless population in particular. And this year, in fact, fresh off a really important victory where our People's Budget Movement, led by the activism of the North Lake residents, where we just had our community meeting live, our last community meeting live from North Lake. Let's hear from Sean Smith, who helped, lead the effort to stop the sweep of North Lake, and then also is helping lead efforts through the People's Budget Movement to stop the sweeps, throughout the city, and of course also to defund the police, to fund renter organizing. So Sean Smith, please go ahead and take it from here, will you?
Thank you, Adam. First I want to, on behalf of North Lake residents in Nicholsville, thank everybody who supported us for this historic victory. It means a great deal to the folks here. There's a great sense of relief as to, knowing that we don't have to leave here in the middle of the summer, in the middle of a pandemic. Secondly, I want to say that, the status quo politicians will tell you, oh, we can't fund this and this and this at the same time. The fact is that we can prevent evictions, and we can build tiny house villages, and we can build housing, adequate housing for the tens of thousands of people that need it, all simultaneously. There is no excuse. And it starts with ridding ourselves of excess baggage that we don't need. That's why we need to defund the police. By 50% at least. 50% of that budget is not labor. It's overtime and toys that they buy from the US military in surplus. It's insane to think that police departments across the country would use chemical weapons against their own citizenry. Thirdly, we need to defund, the navigation team, sending armed men to disband people who are traumatized by by being homeless in a society so wealthy as ours. It is insane. We need to be sending people out there who can offer services and have linkage to services that would truly help people. I urge everyone to call in and hold, the politicians' feet to the fire. They made a promise and now they're backing out. Defund the police, support Black and Brown communities by demanding that they build community-based programs that defer people away from the criminal justice system and help build community. Community is so incredibly important, and it's what makes society work. Thanks, Adam.
All right, thank you, Sean. I really appreciate your words, and yeah, if there's ever a demonstration of the impact that building strong community can have, it is the example of the North Lake Tiny House Village residents, who again I had the privilege of broadcast live streaming from their village during the last meeting, and this is an example of a community that's created in some of the most difficult circumstances, not just a lack of basic resources that a lot of us take for granted in the form of income, and but also just the attacks from the political establishment. And to think, I was blown away. I had heard previously, but it was reconfirmed that in this whole period of coronavirus, not a single positive coronavirus test has occurred in that tiny house village. And this is in the context of a homeless community that has been, like other marginalized communities, just ravaged by this pandemic. And it really does show the value that self-organized homeless encampments have. And so, when we're talking about defunding the police, I totally agree that we are talking about, an investment in Black and Brown communities, and an investment, a shift in approach from, the apparatus that maintains inequality towards actually directly funding the working class interests, the interests of marginalized communities of color in particular, who have been, neglected for so long. We're going to go ahead right now, and we're going to keep Sean Smith and Reverend Angela Ying, on the Zoom call. We've got, 23 minutes before we're going to, deliver this message for full defunding of the 50%, as the movement's demanded. We're going to make that on the city council right at a time when it's set to vote, it would appear, going back on their promises. We're going to go ahead and take a little bit of time to go through a presentation, and I think that Nick, organizer in Chama's office, is going to help us go through this. If you could go ahead, Nick, and share that the slideshow. This is a slideshow that we want. We'll put the link, and hopefully Sasha or Nick can put the links in the live stream so that people can have this, have access to this slideshow. Obviously, there's far more information that we're going to be able than one can transmit directly to City Council in 60 seconds or in 2 minutes. It's important to remember, we're giving our public comment to City Council, but in reality, we're speaking to the movement. This is a movement that has to be built. If and when we don't win the full 50% defunding, as I think a sober assessment of our power right now would indicate that we might not be winning the full 50%. What that means then is we've got to build a stronger, more powerful movement. And this is the information that we want to be able to transmit to working people all across the city, just like we did 2.5 years ago when the Amazon tax was repealed. Our movement didn't rest on its laurels. We took the political, lies, distortions of the ruling class head on, and we were able, to build a stronger movement that was capable of winning the tax. It was, in fact, 5 times bigger than the one that was repealed. So let's go ahead and remember that, this information is, for us as a movement. And of course, we want to help prepare our public comment, which we'll be giving in just 20 minutes. So here we're gonna, we know that the demand from the movement is to defund the Seattle police by at least 50% and invest that in Black and brown communities. We're gonna go ahead and go through a slideshow which reviews, the people's budget proposal, which is an actual proposal to defund the SPD by 50% that council members will vote either yes or no on. And then we're gonna see, some of the ways that they're trying to wiggle out of that right up there in full view. And then of course, as a movement-based meeting here, we're gonna then set our sights on the Monday City Council meeting, which is August 10th, which is when the final vote on this special budget discussion on the special budget will be had. And then of course, at the same time, prepare our ground for the struggle to come. So if you could move on to the next slide. Let's go ahead and start off by looking at what exactly the Seattle Police Department looks like right now. And after I'm done going through this slide, it'd be nice to hear if, Sean and Reverend Ying, if you could kind of give your experiences of what, policing currently looks like in the city, with a $409 million budget as we see. That's fully 27% of the city's entire discretionary budget. And of course, this is completely illogical when you think of all the basic needs that are not being met by community, for community all throughout the city. But it does start to make sense when you consider the insane inequality. The reality of $1 trillion company living next to 12,000 homeless people, the idea of the 2 most richest people in the world living right alongside a city where, average rent for a 1-bedroom goes for more than $2,000 and is, outside of the reach of most workers. And concretely, we see the city spends more on the police than it does on, human services like for the elderly, homeless services, arts, neighborhood funding. It's nearly double even than the fire department. So let's go on to the next slide. But before I begin, continue, Reverend Ying, what does this policing look like to you and your community, where we put $409 million for the police and leave so much neglected in the process? And then I'll go to you, Sean.
Yeah, well, if you can definitely see, it sees basically how it's so important, even as we're asking from August 1st until the end of the year. that the 85 million that's left be used towards our communities. As you look at the budget and even see from your chart, you could see that all of the combined, from the Parks and Rec all the way down to the arts and culture, all of that combined together does not even add up to what is being spent by the Seattle Police Department. So when we say that we want to defund 50% of the budget from August 1 to the end of the year, it's, it's very, it's just what needs to happen. It's just so important. Look at all these things that we could do from the housing, education, the libraries, arts and culture, the neighborhoods, tiny house villages.
All right, well, thank you so much. And actually, Nick, if you could go on to the next slide, because I think it might be somewhat appropriate to possibly to what Sean could come in on the experiences that homeless people of the police. When look at this slide where we see that 17% of the city workforce are SPD, but 60% of the top city salaries are in, and it's an average, of the 119 of the 200 top paid executives. Seattle Police Department officers, sergeant, lieutenants paid an average of $268,000 per year. So Sean, what's your experience of this $409 million police budget as homeless services are neglected? Sean, I believe you're on mute still. We cannot hear you if you're talking.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
I got you.
All right. I have to say, $268,000 a year, I could fund 2 tiny house villages, fully operated, self-managed, and reach out and get case management for folks in those villages. It's insane to think that we have tens of people making that kind of millions of dollars, of taxpayer dollars going into administrative work within one department. Every other department in the city has had to streamline their administrative processes and pare down all that middle management. Why not the SPD?
Right. No, and that's a valuable question, and that's the question that obviously the Justice for George Floyd movement is asking, and that's the question that our movement and the People's Budget movement is demanding that actually be done in earnest. Nick, if you could go on to the next slide, that's actually where we begin to grapple with what that looks like. And concretely, it's not a mystery, much as council members and the political establishment will try to hem and haw and make it seem super confusing. It's actually mathematics. It's quite straightforward. 50% of the SPD budget, given that we're about 7 months into the year, is $85 million. That's what defunding the police by at least 50% looks like. And as Councilmember Sawan explained, it is absolutely doable. They've got the votes that could be done today and then on Monday, wherein we could, if there were the political will, shift $85 million into affordable housing, into services for Black and brown working class communities, renter organizing, eviction defense, youth programming, alternatives to the repressive policing that we've seen and caused so much suffering in Black and brown communities for decades, literally, and stopping the sweeps could be a concrete reality. If this 50% did occur, mind you, and as Reverend Ying and Sean just alluded to in terms of the what's being neglected, the SPD would still have 5 times more than the entire year funds for immigrants and refugees, for enforcing labor standards and civil rights combined. So it's absolutely right that this can be done, and they've got a concrete option to do it. Nick, can you go ahead and just show the next slide, which in its most simplest forms, the People's Budget proposal is to take $85 million from Seattle Police Department. That includes $16 million, which is already promised by the mayor. But then an additional $69 million in cuts across the board. And let's go ahead and show this next slide, and I'll have, we've already begun, to kind of discuss what would be possible in the event that we actually did do community investment. But let's go ahead and kind of, just if at the risk, dwell on this for just a little bit, because this really is, where we see the alternative to things like $6.3 million just in overtime. In the first 12 days of the George Floyd protest, the Seattle Police Department spent $6.3 million in overtime. Now let's look at this here, and we see that, the demand to defund the police, we want to put $15.5 million into restorative justice and other community programs. And mind you, these this legislation includes all of the decriminalized Seattle, all of the King County Equity Now, all of those demands that are put forward, to help empower and raise up the, the capacity of community organizations. But it also takes into account, the housing needs in the event that there isn't capacity for grassroots organizations to take up, different alternatives to policing, et cetera. The fact is that for decades, the Central District has been gentrified, and the lack of affordable housing is acute. Reverend Jean, maybe you could talk about, what would it look like, is there the need for that housing? What would it look like? Maybe talk about the 1,000 homes in the CD campaign that has been, such a huge part of your activities over the past several weeks and months. Maybe you could fill us in a little bit about what would this funding go to?
Yeah, sure. As you know, Councilmember Shama Sawant and a number of Black clergy in the Central District brought forward, along with all the work that Tax Amazon movement had done, to fight for $50 million for affordable housing in the Central District, because gentrification has been going on since the 1960s. We've moved from pretty much 70 to 80% Black and brown neighbors to 18%? It's just outrageous. So if this proposal that you see right before us on the slide, make sure you keep that, because that is a vision. And a lot of meeting, we have to keep the vision in front of us and the mission in front of us. And as we know, every dollar counts in order for us to make a difference in our Black and brown communities and the most vulnerable communities. I think one of the things that's also important to note, and I know Councilmember Sawant and others on the staff has brought up, is that not only is the establishment willing to betray us, but the same and the communities and the people, but also what I found in my own community is they're trying to divide the Black and brown leaders. They're trying to divide the Black communities. And that's really something that we need to stand in unity for, because basically we need to stand together as a people's movement, as a people's budget, and say, no, we will not be divided. We are us. We are together on this. We will make sure that we stand for our most vulnerable. And that's and in doing that, with the Tax Amazon movement, which was incredible, we were able to bring in at least 18 million for the affordable housing. It would have been great to have 50 million, but 18 million is a start. And this is a continuation of that. Now, a lot of young people, I want to share with you, for 7 years, we fought to stop the no new youth jail. 7 years. Some of us faith leaders hooked ourselves to the construction while they were doing so. And I just wanted to let you know, 7 years later, after it's being built, Dow Constantine is saying that because there's not very many young people in the jails, thank be to God, he's going to close it in 2025. Now, he doesn't just do that, out of nowhere. He does that because the people demand day after day after day. So that's why I encourage you, today in this historical moment as well, as our young people get on the streets at noon and walk from the no new youth jail all the way to City Hall, whatever, that we remind ourselves and each other that we are in this together to make sure that we defund the police, that we bring, more tiny house villages, that we, eliminate the sweeps, because that's just for garbage. And we do a whole lot for our community, because basically the Seattle Police Department, as Shama Sawant and others have said, have heard our young people, have heard our communities. If they did what they were supposed to do, we wouldn't need to cut it, but we need to cut it because we need these programs. We cannot stand for austerity budget. We need to make a difference in our Black and brown communities, our immigrant communities, and a whole host of other communities. And living on the South End, I know that need is great. And so I'll continue to stand with the working people to make it happen.
All right, thank you so much, Reverend Ying. And we're a little bit less than 10 minutes out. So let's go ahead. Now we've had a chance to see the movement's demands for defund. We've had a chance to see what a concrete proposal to defund looks like. Nick, if you could go ahead and go to the next slides, and we're gonna go through these a little bit more rapidly because now we bump up against what is the establishment shenanigans in the face of a big movement. And later on, we'll come back to Sean to talk about kind of the way the establishment does these shenanigans. But let's look here over the next several slides. July 8th, July 9th, you know, when the George Floyd movement, and here locally, there was a lot going on around the protests. We have establishment council members publicly declaring their commitment to defund by 50%. Let's look concretely. Nick, if you could go to the next slide. And, you know, I'll just kind of read some of the highlights here. We've got Councilmember Lorena Gonzalez saying now is the time to divest from the police department. You know, the status quo is no longer acceptable. And of course, people should look at the link here to get these full slides. Go on to the next one if you could, Nick. We've got Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda saying it is the institution of policing itself that must be dismantled. Now is not the time for business as usual. So really quite big promises being made. Next slide, please, Nick. We've got Councilmember Dan Strauss, you know, demanding the movement don't let up on us. You know, these are just words until actions are taken. And then, of course, July 9th, we also have Councilmember Tammy Morales. And of course, it is important for our movement, you know, not in the sense of just, you know, personally, lambasting this or that individual, but these are our elected representatives responding to their own constituents and saying, I support your demand as a movement. I'm going to, in this case, you know, shift significant resources from SPD back to community. It's, you know, it's time to get busy and ready to pay the fee. We also have Councilmember Herbold, if you could go on to the next one, thanking the council colleagues and also supporting this effort to, you know, demand to defund. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. In the last 5 minutes, you know, as a movement, we want to, you know, take a step back. I couldn't agree more with the words of, you know, Shama and Reverend Ying and others who have, you know, it is important to celebrate the victory at forcing the city council to make these promises, but at the same time, you know, recognize that a promise is just a promise, but until the actual votes to defund are taken, then it is just that, a promise. Let's go on to the next slide where we can see the proposal by the establishment politicians to defund. This slide doesn't take long because there is no proposal by the other council members to actually defund. And that, of course, is not something we celebrate. That's something that we lament as a movement, but also take seriously. And in reality, here is what we've got by way of actual defund proposals. $2.5 million in cuts, you know, adding on the 16.3 million that the mayor has cut, you know, as included as part of her budget. That is not the council's cuts, that's the mayor's cuts. But at the end of the day, we can all agree, we don't need to be mathematicians to see that it amounts to far less than an actual defunding. We're gonna slide, you know, let's go through, Nick, if you could show the next slide here really quickly, just seeing what we're talking about when it comes to actual shifts in Seattle police officers. It is a tiny cut when in reality, we're talking about an austerity budget where in other sectors like bus drivers are seeing deep cuts. When the movement is demanding a deep cut to the police department, we're not seeing anything approaching that. Go ahead, Nick, go on to the next slide, please. And yeah, what we're talking about, you know, lacking time to go through it fully because it's just a few minutes. before we go on to the council. We see at the bottom here, less than $1 million in reality is being taken from the SPD. We have a lot of, and next slide here, please, a lot of what we would call robbing Peter to pay Paul. Funding community, but not by defunding SPD, but rather by drawing from the rainy day fund and drawing from other things, which frankly, the movement itself has also won. Go on to the next slide here, and we'll put this link in the live streams. That's where you can see the other proposals. Don't take our word for it. Go ahead and look for it for yourselves. Go on to the next slide, because now we can see, as of July 9th, we had all these promises, but it didn't take even a month before we start to say that, we don't have gear money to take that to put it into community. All of a sudden, the excuses start to come. Go on to the next slide too, please, where we also see Teresa Mosqueda, kind of expressing that idea that we have to renegotiate the SPOG contract before we can actually defund, which, as Shama indicated, is an absolute lie. Go ahead and go on to the other, to the next slide here. What we see is, in fact, that the Seattle Police Department, does have the money. They could defund. They spend $34 million per month. The community is asking for half of that to be invested in Black and Brown community. But again, go on to the next slide here, Nick, and we'll see that, when the establishment wants to do something very rapidly, they'll do it. They absolutely could do it. The movement should remember that is the reality. I won't have time to go through the examples, but the Amazon tax repeal, Boeing tax break, and even right now, Metro bus drivers getting laid off. Let's go on to the next slide, and I'll have to go through and let's go on to the summary slide, Nick, if you could. Yeah, perfect. This is what we have up against us. One minute, to public comment. We've got a people's budget movement, which is presenting cuts by 50% to the Seattle Police Department budget to fund all kinds of Black and Brown community needs, other basic things like tiny house villages, renter organizing. We've got a people's budget movement that lays the groundwork for a full 50% cut in the budget to come, and one that funds community groups and social needs. And on the other hand, we've got a council which is not proposing doing any of that. So thank you again on behalf of Councilmember Shama Sawan, everybody for joining. Thank you, Reverend Ying and Sean Smith. Please, we'll see you on Monday again for the final vote. Many of you will also be going to the rally at the youth jail at noon. We might see you there. And let's keep up this fight to defund the Seattle Police Department by at least 50% and for the other people's budget demands. Solidarity. And we'll go ahead and put a splash screen on there, which shows you how to get right to that Seattle channel, and then await to make your public comment.